few years ago, I was going through some stuff with my mum and dad. They were getting towards the end of their lives, and as the only child, I was finding it really tough to make the choices that I had to make. And having to make those choices didn't sort of stop at the first one. There were more that came along. I wrote a piece which was kind of cathartic for me about friendships and family relationships, ostensibly about my uncle, my dad's brother, and how I felt his presence before I'd seen him walk into the room after having not seen him for many years. And he had that sort of aura where you just sort of felt that things were going to be okay. He just sort of had that gravitas. So when he died, it was a huge loss. But his funeral, reconnected me to family members that I'd drifted away from. So anyway, this got me kind of thinking about my whole relationship with relationships, friendships. How I've sometimes let them go too easily, and how reconnecting made me feel, and then tracing all of that back to some formative influences or events to give myself some understanding. Kind of like DIY therapy that would probably make Laurel and Hardy look professional. Anyway, at best, there's a tenuous link between my sort of haphazard episode intros and my guests. Being tenuous is one thing that I do well, but I feel that my that human relationships that are the one thing that's really going to act as the glue to keep us together in such a damaged, splintered, and unhinged world, and having the emotional intelligence to look inwardly and outwardly about why relationships work, why they don't, why they should, and why they shouldn't is such a kind of powerful thing. My guests today have written their third LP as Hey Laker, and it's called Serenity Now, which is largely, or not so largely, if I haven't done my homework properly, about their own experiences of disconnecting and reconnecting, and it's such a powerful and beautiful piece of work from beginning to end. So enough of me, and it's a real pleasure to welcome Jem Coulter and Ed Tullett to the show. Both of you, welcome, and thanks for indulging me for that short period on a Monday morning, which I know is really heavy going.
Oh, I mean, very
That's
professionally
great.
done.
Like, all
Oh
right, here
God,
we go.
I realized when I was sort of thinking about what I was going to say, and then I thought, oh God, yeah, we're going to record this on a Monday morning. That's really haven't thought things through, but there you go. Anyway,
Wake up call.
a wake up call, yeah. So, I mean, if we just kind of start with perhaps with the new record, because it's what, about 6 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, now till it comes out towards the end of June, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, Ed.
No, you've gone. I'm just trying to remember the exact album release date, which I can't. So
It's my birthday. It's my birthday. It's the 26th of June. So
26th
just
of
ask
June.
me. I always remember that.
That was the reason that you picked it, because it's
No, it wasn't.
a memorable
it just
one.
happened. Someone picked a date out of the air, and it happened to be my birthday. Yeah, it's just nice. Kind of.
So how are you feeling with it?
celebration.
How are you feeling with sort of six-ish weeks to go then?
good. Yeah, I mean, it's an odd thing because, I mean, as always happens with music, is it takes a long time to release stuff. And I mean, this record's been done for a year and a half, getting on 2 years. So it's always this odd thing where you're so in it when you're making it, and then you kind of disconnect from it for a little while you're, say, finding a label or working with the label to release it, and working on sets and campaign stuff and whatever. And then suddenly you're right back in it, and you kind of have to really put yourself back in that frame of mind, and sometimes you approach it the same way, and sometimes because of that distance you approach it differently. But no, it's just really great to get it out. Obviously we haven't put anything out bar a single since 2020, I think, so it's been a little while, and yeah, just really kind of nice to reconnect with that audience and the music itself.
Yeah, I think as always, just like excited for people to hear it, more than anything. And it feels like, I don't know, it's something we've lived with the last couple of years, and I think in a lot of ways it is quite different to the stuff that we've done before, and so it's, I don't know, it's almost like I feel excited to get everyone else up to speed with where we're at. And yeah.
How do you sort of typically feel once a piece of music gets out there? Whether it's sort of Haymaker or other stuff that you've done. Once a piece of music gets out there, how do you then sort of feel about it? Because I've heard some artists think that okay, it's kind of not mine anymore. It's the public sort of have ownership, if that's the right word, of the music. How does that make you feel?
I never thought about it like that, but I think that maybe is how I feel. I kind of I mean, often, lyric writing and stuff is often left to interpretation, the way that both I and we write. And I think that's a big part of it is, what the songs become, in other people's hands or ears. I think, it's an odd thing again, when you've had that distance from something, then you come back to it, and then you're like, wow, like this was, the big 3 months of both work and our lives. And I think it is kind of nice to just let other people enjoy it, and you're also just inherently moving on as an artist, stuff. And 9 times out of 10, whenever you're releasing a record, you're probably working on something else that you're artistically potentially more focused on at that time. But no, it's kind of nice to help frame it, and that's what you do with all the asset creation and stuff, which is it's a whole thing in itself, very different to making music.
I think I don't know. I always think about it like you like when you're writing a song, you never really get to like experience it for the first time in the way that a listener does, where you put your headphones on and you like press play and you're suddenly kind of like in this world and everything. It's kind of I specifically remember this from like teenage years where you listen to a piece of music or like a song that came out from an artist you really liked, and time would like slow down into like kind of and it would be so like a kind of emotionally visceral that as an artist you never really get to experience that kind of side of first listening to a song, because I don't know, you never get to listen to the song for the first time because you're always kind of like rehashing it, reworking it and things. And I feel like it's nice to, I don't know, my experience of writing is the joy of it, is that you're kind of immersed in the details of that like first listening experience, where you're kind of like crafting every moment that someone is going to then kind of hyperfixate on, like if they're really interested in it. And and I feel like to be able to then, I don't know, you're always kind of giving it away. It's never really like yours. You're just kind of like making it. And I feel like, there's something to be said for like, I don't know, giving it to the world and everything being kind of open to interpretation. But I don't know if I ever feel like the songs are like mine. I feel like songs that are mine are like songs that I have like, I don't know, other people's songs that I have real like emotional attachments to or stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because it's always going to be intended for someone else to listen to. Then it's just about kind of making that idea as like clear as possible and kind of honing in on the delivery. And in terms of,
well, I think that you don't feel with you don't, unless you really try, you don't feel with other people's music is, especially coming at it, I mean, we're both producers, so coming at it from that point of view is like sometimes I'll sit and listen to someone else's music and I'll try and really fixate on something and be like, oh, that's weird. I feel like I would have hated how that guitar part actually sounds. But when I'm listening to it, I don't notice that at all. And obviously when you're producing your own stuff, which we do, 9 times out of 10, this new record is the only record we've made with an external producer. But when you're so kind of hypercritical listening to your own stuff, you get really fixated on one thing. You're like, oh, that doesn't sound right or whatever, and then you kind of, it's impossible to step back from it and be like, but actually that doesn't actually matter probably, and like you don't think about that for anyone else's music, so why are you thinking about it for yourself?
How does standing too close?
How does that sort of fit? It's an interesting one, this, because I'm interested, like, how that sort of fits with your sort of personalities of, for example, sort of perfectionism, that idea of saying, well, maybe we do this sort of, that'll sound a little bit better. It's almost like sort of chasing this sort of ideal. And as you said, Ed, sort of chasing those, fixating on those sort of small things that, but a lot of people, and we do it I do it in lots of parts of my lives, and think, actually nobody cares. There's only
Yeah.
you that cares about this.
I'm definitely more of a perfectionist than Gemma would say, and in like often a negative way. I find, like, a frustrating way. It's kind of hard for me to get past, either doing something as right as I can do it, or really trying to make something perfect, which obviously there's actually no real definition for. Whereas actually, something that might not have been recorded as well or done as well, I love a lot more. But I don't often do that because I'm not. I don't know. Just allowing myself that.
Yeah.
I actually think we're equally perfectionists, just in different ways. Like, I feel like you're kind of very in a kind of balanced perfectionism, like, this is how we should record this, and like doing everything quite like I guess to kind of in a like routine like process, kind of very sticking to it, whereas I get really hyper fixated on like that snare is a little bit late, or there's something about the like feel of the drums doesn't feel right, and I'm now going to spend like 5 hours aligning everything.
Yeah, no, I'm always like,
You're like, nah, it's fine, like nobody's gonna know, and then I'll come back like 2 days and I'll be like, no, actually now everything sounds really weird because I've like put everything into like a manual timing. But it was really interesting at Ali Chance Studios. He had a little like science timer. Do you remember that, Ed? We only used it a couple of times. A little like science timer, and whenever we were like going down some rabbit hole, he'd like stick it on so we could see how long we were basically just faffing around for, like doing something that wasn't really going to make a difference. And then when it got to like, I don't know, like half an hour plus, he'd be like, okay, let's move on. So much so I actually bought a kitchen timer for myself just to like keep an eye on like faffing time in
proper
my studio
influence
at home.
then,
yeah, because it works really well. It's just like, oh crap, I've actually spent like an hour looking at this thing online, and I don't need to.
It's interesting, like for this like for this podcast and some writing that I do. I've started doing my own like design, like kind of graphic design, and I'd never done any graphic design before, and I did a sort of short online course, and I sort of fell in love with the work of David Carson, who was the designer behind Raygun magazine in the I think in the sort of mid-90s. And it was great because he sort of broke rules. I didn't know the rules, so it was all fine. And but interesting on that, I find myself, like, if I'm doing some typeface or something like that, just sort of like noodling around with it, and I frustrate the hell out of myself because I'll look at it and think, oh, you've messed around with that just too much, and just like delete, or kind of start again. And I think I have this thing with this sort of part of my personality or kind of psyche that's quite analytical, and then there's another part which is my instinct, my kind of gut instinct, and sometimes that, do you know what I mean, that sort of tension between the two.
Yeah, I think I was actually I feel like we were talking about this the other day, Ed, or like, because I was definitely talking about it in therapy, which is a very important place to talk about these things. That it feels like there's always sort of two parts of my head that are having a fight with each other, and one is the sort of like, I guess, kind of analogous to that inner child character who's just like, I just want to like play and go down rabbit holes and just like fuck about, basically.
Yeah.
And then the other one who's like, no, we need to get stuff done. And I think as someone who makes stuff, you can't really have one without the other, because if you have the inner child, you never actually finish anything. You just end up starting loads of projects and having a great time, but you never actually like produce anything. And the other one, you never actually make anything because you kind of are just like you never like do anything particularly creative because you're not really kind of like, I don't know, following your intuition, following your and I think the hardest thing is there's something about computers and design and stuff that's really like it kind of like disconnects you slightly a bit with time, and you can so easily just like fall down kind of obsession rabbit holes of like,
Yeah.
I need to do this like little thing, and actually in the end it doesn't really make that much difference, and there's just something that's quite satisfying about, I don't know, using Photoshop, and that's the kind of thing that you're really
Yeah.
enjoying doing.
I actually did some of the design, kind of to start with manually, so literally sort of cutting up bits of paper and sort of sticking. And you're right that I think because there's less, perhaps, well, so let's say there's more opportunity on the computer to do little sort of tiny changes. If I try to do some of those, when I'm cutting things out, I become a bit ham-fisted and kind of can't quite do it. So there's less opportunity to do it. But you're right. You definitely don't go. I didn't find myself going down a, kind of like this sort of rabbit hole of changing things when I was doing it manually.
Yeah, you kind of have that.
Practical limitations.
Yeah, the practical limitations, and just like, I don't know, there's something about everything being in a computer screen where everything's so like fluid and easy. It's like it's like the way that computer games are kind of addictive, where it's just like,
Mm,
I get so much done with so much kind of limited like physical ability. Whereas, I don't know, like if you're kind of Assassin's Creed and you try and start climbing up actual buildings, you don't get very far because it's just tiring.
yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Exactly.
I
like
mean,
that, but then like smaller,
this is why
cutting up
everyone
bits of
says
paper.
so everyone says that limitations breed creativity, and there's also that like knowing too much and choice paralysis, and like I often think I'm probably a better, not better, but I'll write certain things, especially on stuff like keys and stuff, because I'm not a good keys player that I wouldn't write if I was.
Mm,
And I think it's often good to like, it's like really virtuoso, virtuosic. What's the word? Um,
yeah.
but yeah, people who are incredible at their instruments, and make very very complex music because of it. But it's not. At least most people don't really want to listen to that because it's kind of just a bit too over the top or too hard to understand or whatever. And
Mm.
I think you definitely can know too much with a lot of this stuff. It helps you be creative in other ways.
How do you feel about? I mean, I guess sort of linked into that. How do you feel? I mean, okay, let me come at it from this angle. I was when I was classically trained when I was a kid, so I played the cello. So I was about sort of 16 or 17. And I did all my exams, so that there was a kind of a rule book, and I think that there is particularly a rule book for kind of classical music. Certainly, there was when I was learning it at that age. And I've I've actually started playing again. I bought myself a new one recently. It's interesting how your mind works, because this was all my when I started playing. This was all my dad kind of pushing me into sort of doing this, and it was that was probably the reason that I gave it up. I never felt ownership of it. Um, but then, with them sort of coming to the end of their life, it was like, okay, I feel like there was some unfinished business. Anyway, I started playing again, and I'm teaching myself not to try. It came back, the technique is still there. It's very rusty, obviously, but it's still there. But I'm teaching myself not to use those rules, and it's kind of quite hard,
Mm.
when you've been trained in that way, if that makes sense.
But which also happens with teaching yourself stuff. Like there's, I mean, going back to what we were saying about being perfectionist, or Jem said about me being very routine based, which is very true. I've been
Mm,
trying to recently with stuff being like, okay, don't just like record all of the acoustic guitar for each song at the same time, and don't just use the same mic placement or the
mm,
same chain or whatever for every single song. Like be just try and be more intentional, basically, which is super important. I mean, I know that was a thing that Sibbald sadly recently, that
mm,
was the thing that he was really really like just focused on, was being intentional. And I think
mm.
trying consciously to do that a bit more, because I think when you get into routines and you do follow rules too much or whatever, then or well, not necessarily follow rules, but just do things in the same way that you used to, which
Yeah.
can work from both a rules standpoint, but also something that you've taught yourself, and inherently at the first time you did it was creative, but if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, then yeah, you will kind of just get locked into that, and then you'll be wondering, oh, why doesn't this sound like that? Why can't I make this? And then it's suddenly you realize that if you just try and do things differently, you might actually get there.
I think
Does
that's
that?
something.
Sorry, Jem.
Oh,
Go on.
I was just going to say, I think that's something that we found when we first worked together, was that it was just really nice to be in the presence of someone who works in a different way,
Hmm.
because you do just get, I don't know, for me, like I had literally, I mean, well, I was also like super young. I was think when we first started doing stuff, I was sort of, I think I just turned 19. So I
Mm,
didn't really have any process or know anything about anything. And so kind of seeing you work in such a sort of like, in quite a systematic way, whereas I was just like, blah, 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 we'll just have a bit here and a bit there, and doing stuff in a way that was actually, I guess in some ways it was kind of fairly inefficient, but it was like very, very, almost a bit too creative, um to the point of seeing you work in quite like a systematic way, where we just sort of like harnessed both.
Hmm.
And um I don't know, I think we just learned a lot from each other, and it suddenly sort of like flipped the ways that, like, at least for me, it flipped all of the things I had. Now two options: I could do it the Gem way or the Ed way. And that
mm,
was just like, and then I don't know, I feel like now working with Ali, you get a little, the producer for this new record,
mm.
I don't know, anytime you work with someone, you just get a little bit of an option. You'd be like, oh, I could do it like this. Like, that was an interesting way of doing it, which is why it's just, I don't know, it's just really good to collaborate on stuff.
I I I find it really fascinating. I mean, by all means, call me a nerd, but I find it really fascinating how kind of different sort of personalities or different ways of working, how you come together and and make it as a unit, work. And then when you bring in Ali, say as a as a third party, let's say, again about how those dynamics work together without there being I mean, I'm sure there's there's times of disagreement on things, and then how you sort of work things out from there.
I would say that the hard thing is that when there's two of you, you kind of either disagree or you agree, which
Mm,
makes everything super easy, because most of the time well, I feel like there's certain things that we agree on, and that's just the way that, then that's just the kind of the way that we go. And it feels like then that's just a super easy decision. When there's three of
mm,
you, it is not just you either disagree or you agree. It's
mm,
someone disagrees with the other two, and you end up having this kind of like, I don't know, power of veto, and everyone getting a bit like grumpy with each other. I don't know how often
yeah.
that really happened. I feel like we actually were pretty kind of democratic with all of this.
Mm,
I don't know, like how you remember it, Ed, but like there were definitely some sort of almost quite like principled disagreements, sort of about like things like auto tune or like number of takes and things like that. Like
You have to pick your
Ali's,
battles as well. It's like, oh well, I
yeah,
won
it's
that
true.
one, so I went with the next one. I mean, I can totally see how like bands of 4 or 5 people end up hating each other, because I don't really tend to work with more than one person at a time. Like most of I've got 5 projects, and 4 of them are all with just one other person. And I
mm,
think it can be a too many cooks thing, or like you're inevitably, at least one person is not going to be happy or satisfied with a certain decision, because it's very rare that that many people will all agree on something. It's also quite obvious early on whether you are, like, if I'm presenting an idea to Jemima, probably 8 times out of 10, I probably know if, I mean, Jemima more than anyone, I'm probably maybe unsure, but like some other people I work with, like, Ali, Lacey, who's never more, most of the time I'm pretty sure before I show him something I've written or whatever, whether he's actually going to like it or not. And
Yeah.
obviously that, that symbiotic thing comes with just working with someone a lot. But I think it's, like we said, like this process of working with an external producer who we did this record with Ali Chant, who's an amazing producer, who's done loads of stuff, does
Mm.
Yard Perfume Genius, lots of Squirrel Flower, lots of records that we really love. But it was a real learning curve for us because it's not something we've done before, both working with an external producer, but working in someone else's external space for, I think the original we did 3-week-long sessions in a row, and then we came back and did one extra week, I think was the was what we did. And like, there were so many things that we weren't necessarily used to, which is both exciting and really cool, but also kind of a bit like, just a learning curve.
Yeah. Was it sort of daunting in any way? I mean, getting out of your comfort zone, because it's a sort of situation or a kind of dynamic that you've not been used to working with before.
I was largely excited for it. I think I think there were things that I was excited for, and other things that I was a bit like, I wish I was at home and had my own space to do this. But I think having someone to do all the boring stuff for you, that really helps with just focusing on the fun, creative things. But yeah, like Jem said, it's also you've got to get everything through another person, which makes certain things harder, especially when you're very, very adamant about how you feel about something.
Yeah. I think something that I found that I just kind of brought up and that I remembered now is that I remember distinctly feeling that you have to be quite kind of articulate about your ideas when you're in a room with a couple of people. Kind of more so than just in a room with you, Ed, because I feel like we kind of are quite in tune with each other now. And also it was in some ways working just us, we're in a fairly familiar environment and we can just do stuff. Whereas working in an external producer's like space, you are in an unfamiliar environment. You're with someone who you also don't know that well. And so you kind of, I think I remember spending a bit more time sort of thinking about whether I was like, oh, this is something that I don't like. I need to be able to explain why I don't like it, not to be like, no, I don't like it. Like, I need to be able to say what it is about it. And I think that in some ways is, I think you can hear that on the record because it's a lot of the songs are a bit more sparse. Not sparse, but like a bit more, maybe a little bit more minimalist than we had done before.
Yeah.
Kind of, especially comparably to that's not a word, comparable, especially compared to the first record, which is the I feel like is the record that it is comparable to in terms of the production style. That yeah, and I think that was just I think the ideas, the sections, the melodies, they're all just like a kind of notch up in terms of like idea clarity, and there's like less kind of I guess muddy kind of just like layers of just stuff that's just there to just fill out the sound space. What do you say, Ed?
I think you're on mute, Ed.
Oh.
I said that sounds like my production.
No, I was going to dig at you. I think that's just something. I don't know what that is. I think that's just something that comes when you aren't. When you have three people, there's always someone who's able to kind of like sit back. And I think especially when you have an external producer, there's someone who's like sitting back and thinking about like from a impartial perspective, like what the song kind of technically needs and also what it doesn't need. And actually that maybe just the melody is enough, or like I don't know, that you don't need to fill out every section with a full kind of EQ spectrum of sound. Like actually we can just have this moment be quite like simple, or just this or just that. And I think that was something that was really, really valuable about working with someone else. have a bit
I
of.
mean, I guess you know yes, you know, introducing a new person can you know go one way or can go the other. You know, they you know the other person can perhaps you know if there are any you know issues between yourselves, they can help bridge those and sort of bring you together in some respects as well. So it can be a sort of positive thing, or it can upset the dynamic that you know a positive dynamic that you had. And this is why you know I going back to what I said in in the intro about this you know emotional intelligence and being able to see things from somebody else's perspective. You know, like you were saying, Jem, about how you say so. If you don't like something, how do you say it? You may be comfortable saying it to Ed, but somebody that you don't know as well,
Yeah.
you may be less comfortable saying it in the way that you usually would, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's an important thing. Like, and it only really comes with time or just having a certain connection with
Mm,
certain people. There's still people that I work with, you know, that I've worked with a lot that I couldn't talk to in the same way that I do, you know, say a Jam or an Ali or whatever.
yeah.
Um, I think it's also what Jen was saying. I think is that's what makes a really good producer is not only you know being that third person to kind of run everything through, but also just having that ability to step back from something and like you know a lot of the best producers I know are all really good at just taking stuff out of mixes and you know
Yeah.
really focusing on the minimum of what needs to be there. And I you know jokingly said that sounds like my production, but it's kind of true. I often will just throw the kitchen sink at stuff, and I'll often just kind of leave drones in for an entire song instead of, you know, taking them out at certain points. And there's something that I'm consciously trying to get better at. And when I said about being
Mm,
more intentional, you know, not just leaving the track on for the whole time, but I think it's just when you're an artist as well, it's easy, and you know, not necessarily as an adept producer, it's easy to get caught up in the ideas and be like, oh no, I can't get rid of that sound there because that sounds really cool. And you know, whereas yeah, just and that's what Ali did, and that's you know that's why there's times possibly that there are points where I might feel, oh maybe might have been cooler if we'd done it, or at least for different,
mm,
because there's you know certain things that we probably would have done, but there's other times where I'm like, you know, this definitely needed this, and
mm,
we almost wouldn't have been able to make. Like there's a song on the record called "Break Me Again," which we've had written for probably wrote it before our second record at least,
mm,
like 2019, 2020, and we just knew that we couldn't really produce it in the way that it wanted because it needed to be relatively minimal and kind of everything needed to sound really good but not too overproduced and blah 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 blah.
yeah.
And yeah, I guess working with someone else, especially someone who's so adept, kind of opens up those doors.
What was the you know, as you said, you know, it's the first music that you brought out since what 2020. What was the genesis for? Because obviously that was a that was sort of go right into you know in sort of COVID time. What was the genesis for getting together to you know to make this?
For the new record,
Yeah,
we'd known for a while that we wanted to do a third record. I think it was just, you know, we did so much so quickly, and that was partly because we were both just very kind of feeding off of each other. I just absolutely adored Jem's both music and voice, and you know their production and everything. And
yeah,
I think Jem was kind of keen to just start doing stuff on a you know slightly more professional level, and you know obviously they were very young, but with the new stuff after the second record, I think I mean, you know, it was partly COVID as well, but we kind of took a relatively intentional break to kind of let Jem find their own feet and
yeah,
um, you know just become more of an artist in their own right and get music out and everything, and which I was also excited for because I just wanted to hear it.
mm,
And you know their record is one of my favorite records ever. But
yeah,
the new record, I think we just I don't know. We knew that we wanted to do it. We'd spoken before about doing it with an external producer and kind of using Haylaker as a kind of testing ground for that. Again, it's not something we've done before, and it was just kind of it was a matter of time as to when it happened. I think it was just kind of waiting for COVID to properly die down, and then you know just focusing on other projects for a bit. We're kind of
yeah,
just to yeah just lock in and do it.
Yeah, I think we we got into a pretty crazy routine in kind of basically since sort of 2016,
Mm.
um, until 2020. Like I think it was maybe uh, the weekend before lockdown we had hung out. We were doing some writing with like some friends of mine. So
Mm.
kind of throughout all of that time, we had got into a real regular rhythm of meeting up and writing together, producing. I don't know, like producing and writing and hanging out. Like it wasn't. Yeah, I don't know. It wasn't like every weekend or anything, like because you were living in Cardiff, but it was
We
kind
would
of
often do week long or like 5 day long.
yeah. It would probably have worked out to be about once a month for like I don't know. I guess that's sort of like 4 years. So then
Mm.
to be suddenly kind of faced with we can't hang out, like we can't write anymore. It's kind of a bit of like like I guess
Yeah.
this means we can't. I mean, I think we tried doing some stuff remotely, but like, just wasn't really a vibe. So when we kind of could, and it felt like we had both come to a point in kind of doing our own projects where we had a bit of space and headspace to actually start working on something new. I think we were just like, yeah, let's get back on it. Like, I don't
Mm.
know.
Because I think having the external producer and knowing that you're going to do it in this kind of, the other thing is you're paying for it and you're, blocking out lengths of time. So it's a lot
Yeah.
more intentional inherently than, we would do stuff after over long sprawling periods where we get together for 5 days or a week and then, have another maybe a month off just to kind of mix stuff and then we get together again. And, it's just a longer process time wise because
Mm.
it's not as like it doesn't have to be as focused. And I kind of do like that. Like I like just getting some. I mean, it's also efficient, which I really like being. But it's just
Mm.
getting everything done in a shorter period is kind of nice, and it means you can just completely live that record and that music for that time instead of kind of again having to kind of oh god, I've been working on this other thing for a month. Now I've suddenly got to think about
Yeah.
it again. But the other thing as well is that when we came back to writing after more or less 2 years, it was kind of a bit weird, and I think it took us a little bit of time to get into the swing of things. And then once it did, everything just kind of found its
Mm.
place. We had an album worth of songs very quickly, but yeah, we both changed it a little bit over that time, but matured as both people and writers.
I was just going to ask that how you how you because I'm personally for me myself I found that I'd changed in that period and it's weird. I mean, even coming down to very practical things of being in crowds. I'm still a bit uncomfortable. I'm getting a lot better, but for a large period, so just something like that I kind of changed, and then I thought back to how I felt during that when it all started, and yeah, I think I learned a lot about myself, in that time. I mean, how do you did you see yourselves changing? When you look back to where you are now to then.
I think the big change for me was just being more productive and also starting to properly approach myself as an artist again because I'd had a long period where I hadn't done that, and then I started making
Mm.
just I think kind of 2021 made an absolute shit ton of music, and I just made so much stuff that and also just started approaching. So I had Losum become me as my artist moniker, and that
Yeah.
kind of had a lot more freedom there. So that was the only real big thing. Otherwise, I don't think I changed very much because I think a lockdown suits me down to the ground because I'm pretty much in lockdown about 6 days a week anyway because I just don't
Mm.
really house very much. Whereas maybe it had more effect on Gem. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it happened basically sort of like 4 months after I left university. So I think I was like 22
Mm.
when it happened. So I mean, uh, I it basically just kind of made me face up to like a lot of things that I think I hadn't really had time to like look into about myself. I think things that weren't really like working, and kind of unhealthiness,
Mm.
and suddenly I have to spend like a year and a half living with my sister and her family, and they have like super kind of like regular routine and things, and I don't know, like stuff, I don't know, I found that incredibly helpful in just sort of like, I don't know, there was kind of mental health stuff I hadn't really looked into, and like, I don't know, just like loads of family relationships and stuff. So it really like,
Mm.
I would say that I it was kind of so foundational for me as like a person now. Like I can't really imagine what I would have done if there wasn't a pandemic. Like just to have that opportunity to not work, to make a record, but then to also like directly deal with a lot of the things that I hadn't really had time to kind of process or manage after like quite an intense kind of, I don't know, like it's just kind of quite an intense period. Like I was
Mm.
studying, and also we were making like 2 records, and I don't know, everything was just like quite like, and then suddenly it just sort of stopped, and I was like, oh crap, I have an eating disorder. I don't know, and like
Mm.
I haven't talked to my parents for like 2 years or something stupid, and
Yeah.
like all of these things are just like, oh crap, like I'm not doing that good. Like I really like the stuff that really, the like foundational things like my relationships and like my relationship to food and my body and stuff, like I hadn't really, yeah, I hadn't really like engaged with at all. And so yeah, I think I I did yeah, I mean I don't know how noticeable it was, because obviously like your personality doesn't really change that much for all of those things, but like
Mm.
me as a person, I like sort of became, I felt like worked out kind of a lot of things during that time that I hadn't really had time to work it out, and then kind of coming back together, I guess it must have been, I don't know if you would have noticed that much, but for me it's kind of like, I don't know, everything was a lot more settled, and I was able to be a lot more kind of present in things because I just had sort of cleared my head a bit over the.
I just remember you being more confident in your ideas, and that
Oh,
almost
there we go.
intimidating to a point, because I know that in our writing style is so different, and sometimes I knew it was going to be harder to get certain things by you, but actually that was a good thing because I really wanted to have a lot more of your influence on the writing and the project as a whole. I mean, I think like a lockdown, honestly, like if we could make it work in a social and economic way, then I'd be happy to have a lockdown every year, for a couple of months.
Yeah.
Every 5 years, we just have a little
Yeah, it's just
break.
a nice reset, and like just so much responsibility kind of goes, and it allows you to focus on other things, which I think is actually really good. Obviously for a lot of people it was really really tough, and there were
Mm.
other challenges, but for some people I think it's a really good thing.
Mm. It's interesting. Yeah, I had a lot of sort of change going on. I mean, like I said in the intro, like my mum and dad's health went downhill. I mean, they both died in 2022 within 8 months of each other, and there was a period up to then when they were not well, and I couldn't go and see them. It was one of those sort of situations, when and I had several conversations with doctors and around resuscitation and things like that. So not to get too morbid, but it was a profound period for me where and also I didn't really know what I was doing with my life. What I wanted to do, and this podcast sort of came. That was in 2021, I think, when I started that. Um, and I think at that time I was sort of racked with no confidence or little confidence. So when I was starting, I had to pushed into doing it. So my natural reaction was, well, nobody who's going to want to come and talk to me. That sort of thing. And for a long period of time, I still sort of had that. But so that 2-3 years for me was, yeah, was quite challenging. I look back at it now and think, I'm not sure I'd ever want to go through that again. So it's interesting the different perspectives of you know, I mean, I don't know how I would feel if I hadn't have had all that shit going on, and it had just been, okay, well, I'm here, I can't do very much. There's nothing else going on. There's no dramas or anything like that. But what am I going to do? My experience may have been totally different. Probably would have been.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it is just kind of dependent on what everyone was doing at that time. It's just different for everyone. I feel like
Yeah.
I
I think with a
don't.
lot of people as well, I think it was like early on, it was incredibly hard to adjust to, and then like I know, you know, my experience, it wasn't until 2021 that, you know, don't get me wrong, it was there were parts of it that were nice to kind of not have responsibilities and not do stuff, and then I think I got to the end of
Yeah.
2020 and I was like, hang on, like I'm doing nothing, like
Mm.
really need to start. You know, this is actually a really useful time to start, you know, making a lot of stuff, and then I just made like 4 records in about 6 months, and
Mm.
in 2021, so it became was it? But yeah, it was very weird to adjust to.
Mm. If if we go back to when you were growing up, when you were kids, I'm thinking of sort of formative influences, things that you sort of remember from your childhood. You know, things that stay with you, things that stay with you and have possibly sort of shaped who you've become now, and how your identity, if you want to call that, has sort of shifted over that time.
It's interesting for me. I'm not very good at recalling that stuff, but one thing I thought of when you said that was the second record we made, Holding. We wrote most of it in a cottage in Swanage that Jem's parents.
Yeah, actually, it's
Mm.
kind of we don't have it anymore. But it's kind of like a long story. But like my great grandfather kind of bought these cottages for something ridiculously because they're about to be knocked down. There's
Mm.
like they're really old. I think they were like kind of 1600s or something in Swanage, about to be knocked down because they were kind of slums. And he bought them, and then kind of did them up, and then gave them to his 4 children, and then my granny gave them to us 4 children. So
Mm.
kind of owned by me and my siblings.
Mm.
My parents are kind of obviously like looking after it and things. So it'd been in my family for like a really long time.
Yeah, that was an incredibly nostalgic time in two ways. One, it's nostalgic now for me to look back on because I have the record and it really makes you think of that time and
Mm.
that place. And you know, I think that's a really nice thing to do is to make a record in a different place, and it just really kind of, you know, that thing of like listening to music and it puts you in a certain place. You know, like I
Yeah.
listen to Andy Shelf and it makes me think of the first the first American tour that we did with Nevermore, just because
Mm.
I was listening to that record so much. But with that record, it's really nostalgic that way. But it's also nostalgic in another way in that being in this like seaside town was very kind of nostalgic for like, you know, holidays when I was younger, and
Mm.
I don't know, it just felt kind of like I was in a different place, both literally but
Yeah.
completely in my head as well. So I don't know why necessarily I thought of that when you said about like childhood stuff, but I think in terms of like linking it to this project specifically, like that for me felt like a really kind of childlike um childlike time.
I kind of like that when you I did this project a couple of years, actually it was during lockdown, of stream of consciousness writing, and I like what you just said there, Ed, because that's just like something, you know, the first thing that sort of comes to your mind. You know, without any thought going into it, that's what sort of comes back. So it must be really important for you.
Yeah, and I mean there's always an inherent connection, I guess, if it's the first thing you think of.
Mm.
So yeah, that was a really just a really great time and a really kind of I love that record because of that.
Mm.
Not because, you know, I love the songs, but also just because of it's so evocative of that, like
Yeah.
the making of it.
Yeah, I definitely think the there's something about writing music where you're kind of always. I think we dip into nostalgia quite a lot as like a theme, and
Mm.
kind of draw from that, whether it's like actual memories, or it's more just sort of a sense of feeling from being younger, or just kind of general feelings of like what memories feel like and stuff. I feel like that's a really huge theme for us. I mean, it's kind of like is a really special like record for that reason, because obviously for me, like I actually spent quite a lot of time there as a kid, and
Mm,
also we don't like we sold that house, so we don't have it anymore. So the record feels like a real kind of like timestamp of that place. Um, which is, I don't know, it's super special to have that as like a
interesting.
quite like a physical thing, really, of like
Yeah.
spending time there. I mean, the first thing that came to my head when you said that, if we're going on stream of consciousness, was I used to like make a lot of things out of wood when I was a kid, like probably a bit too young to be using power tools, but I kind of ate. um, but I remember having these kind of like Saturdays where I would just go, I would just like decide to make something and just spend all day kind of making it, and kind of realizing my limitations as an engineer, and like I don't know, as being like an 8-year old, and like I can't make a fully functioning ballista because I don't like have the tools to do that, and I also don't really know how it works. But I'm gonna try. Um, or like yeah, kind of tree houses that don't really like stay up and things like that. And I think I don't know, in terms of what that really kind of brings into my mind, kind of quite like a deep emotional way in terms of relating to making things and being creative, is this kind of idea of stuff you plan to do stuff, and it never ever you never ever arrive at your kind of initial kind of dream of how it's going to be. Like there's always stuff that you kind of like, just practical things, like you can't just, I don't know, like not fully being able to kind of draw the line from one point to another, and know how you're
Mm,
actually going to do it. You're like, okay, I want it to look like this, or I want it to sound like this, but I don't actually know how to do that. And so at some point I'm just going to have to accept an approximation, and all of those approximations then end up being something, and you're like, oh, I made something, but it's not really what I thought it was going to be, but it's also
yeah.
just something else, and that's kind of cool in its own way. And I feel like doing that as a kid, I think as a kid that's very frustrating, because a lot of it you kind of internalize it being like, I'm too little, I'm not clever enough, I don't know how to
Mm,
do things yet, and that's frustrating because like how come everyone else can do stuff and I can't do stuff. But now I'm kind of, I think I've accepted it as something that is just part of life, a little bit
mm,
part of making stuff, where the vision is very important, but the vision is not the only thing. You can't just like religiously hold on to your vision. At some point you have to accept that, I don't know, the vision and the outcome are actually two separate things. And every time you can try and approximate your vision, you're going to get better at approximating it, but you're never really going to get to this sort of like idealized perfect music that's in your head, or perfect treehouse that's in your head or whatever. And that, I think, is something that I take as like quite a strong lesson from being a kid and making stuff.
mm. So
Yeah.
you've made me think there about you know what we're like as kids, and almost we have this I guess the sort of sense of play, and in a way don't care actually, because we don't know. And a bit particularly when we're sort of very young, and this I wonder as we sort of get older, if that sort of sense of play kind of gets knocked out of us, as we get more responsibilities, we sort of come into society, and to a lesser or greater degree we sort of abide by social rules. And I always think at the in our a child is as us as a child is kind of like the purest form. You know, you're sort of almost unaffected by all the sort of shit that you have to sort of deal with, and I just wonder. I certainly sort of feel that as I've got older, that I was always sort of one of these people that would be so self-conscious and worrying about what people would think. You know, sometimes, and it would be like I would get inertia sometimes because of it, and you learn to live with things, don't you? As you and adapt. And certainly now, you know, I'm 56 now, and I don't care about many of those things that I used to care about. And it's almost like I feel in some ways that I'm kind of going back to sort of when I was a kid, and you feel you're a lot less self-conscious before you come into sight. I don't know if any of that makes sense at all.
think it's about risk, isn't it? Because I don't know, as a kid, you
Yeah,
don't have
that's a
any
good point.
responsibilities, and
Mm,
you make stuff, and there's nothing weighing on it. Like now, if either of us make stuff, there's a sense of, oh, like, do I show this to people? And it's not only do I show this to people,
yeah.
it's like, do I show this to like fairly large audience, and can I, like, you know put it out there as a
Mm,
essentially like a product, and as a I don't know, I think it's really hard. It makes sense. It's really hard to kind of access that same level of like lightness, I guess, that you have when you're a kid, where you just like, take it or leave it. Like, I felt like
mm,
making this thing, and now I don't feel like making it anymore. And I think that's really important to have a bit of that, and for that to kind of be the core seed of it. I think a lot of what you make is that it's quite like a pure. It's a kind of comes from curiosity, I guess, where you're just
mm.
like interested in doing something or trying something new. But
It's time
also,
pressure as well.
what's that?
It's time pressure as well. Time doesn't exist when you're a kid. Like, whereas now
Yeah.
it's
True.
like, oh God, I've got this coming up and I've got to think about that next
So
week.
true.
And, you know,
Yeah.
That's a really good point, though. Actually, yeah. Time doesn't matter. You sort of out playing, and then suddenly, yeah, it's kind of time to go in for your tea or
it's also
something like
doing
that.
something professionally as well. Like, obviously what we're very lucky to get to do what we do, but, making music for a living is amazing, but you lose that play aspect, or at least I certainly have, well, or at least what traditionally used to be my play aspect of it, like playing in bands and stuff. Like, I remember
Mm,
having friends over who I used to be in bands with, I'm still good friends with, but people I was friends with at school, and um, them being like, oh, let's like jam and like muck around. And whenever anyone plays anything like silly or like jokingly, if it's longer for like than like a minute or two, I just get like, oh, all right, like why
yeah.
don't we could try and make something good, like and I think that's twofold for me, because it's that, but it's also I have this like inherent need to like make things that exist, and like if I'm going to pick
Mm,
up a guitar, I never just pick up a guitar to just muck around and play. It's always got to be because I'm writing something, or I'm like adding to something that I've written or produced or whatever. Which is,
mm,
both. It's kind of sad in a way if you want to look at it that way, but I also think it's good because it's motivating, and it's like
mm.
mission, and I'm actually getting stuff done, and I'm doing stuff that ultimately is part of like a bigger thing. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of that play aspect has gone.
If I could just ask Ed on that, when you're so you're trying to sort of create something, that the process and the journey of getting towards that creation, that sort of vision that you have, is that a fun part for you, or is it almost like there's a means to an end?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I mean, I think it's weird. It's a weird thing to kind of stop yourself and think, "Is this fun?" But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think like most of the
How
time,
do I define fun?
yeah. I think if I'm really driven towards it and it's something I clearly want to make, then that is the fun bit for me.
Mm,
And kind of, yeah, like getting to that point where you can finally hear a song kind of fully realized, and whether it's how
mm,
you had originally or not, but kind of, yeah, having something that you can have and hold and that you've made, I think is the most fun thing for me. I think if it might be fun in the moment to muck around and play like silly punk rock covers or whatever, but then
mm,
because I'm not left with anything that actually lasts, I'm not as, I mean, I'm not very good at being in the moment anyway. I'm not very good with kind of more ephemera and stuff. So I think that's partly my thing, and less of like a broad thing. But yeah, I think the play aspect there is kind of transitioned from in the moment to more of an ongoing process.
I don't know. I also think that we've done that, like both of us have had times where music was something that we kind of did to for fun, to escape, to like do something different, to feel inspired. And now I think that I feel very like okay that it doesn't feel like that anymore, and that there's other things that I can do that feel like that are like, like as a you get like, it's not like you get bored with stuff, but you get like, you just get, I don't know, the initial bit of fun is kind of working something out, and once you've worked it out, you can either just sort of like discard it or use it. And I feel like music and making music and writing music is something like, there's little bits that you're always learning and things, but kind of the idea that you can record and make a song, or you can like play an instrument with someone else in it, you make a sound and you can make something, is like, it's not really like a novel thing anymore. Like it's still really cool, but you can we that's just what we do. And I think that like the original kind of like point of the creativity and the curiosity is still, at least for me, it's still kind of like it's the little light that I kind of follow when I'm like making, like when I'm kind of initial ideas and initial kind of parts and things like that, that it feels like a really integral part of the making process. But it is not the like totality of it. Like there's lots of things that are quite like methodical and boring, but there's other parts of my brain that quite enjoy that, like just the kind of techie side of it, that I don't know, me as a kid would not have found that fun, but like I get some other kind of value out of it. But then in order to just sort of like feed that side of myself as a person, I find there's just other stuff that I do that you kind of, that to play is maybe not like, doesn't really feel like play anymore, because they're not exactly like sat down with like Lego or whatever. But I don't know, there's a sense of play in terms of just doing little things, I guess, just like, I don't know, wearing a stupid outfit or whatever, like just like, I don't know, sometimes there's kind of, I get to kind of points in my life or like in my routine or my days where I feel like I just need to do something a bit different, whether that's just like wake up at like 6 and just go outside and just like, or just do stuff where you something that you don't regularly do. And that for me feels like the kind of where I get that sense of kind of rejuvenating play that kind of feeds into, I guess it kind of feeds into like inspiration or a kind of feeling of freshness of ideas and things. And I don't know, you find that in like lots of things.
Yeah. Marvelous. That's really wonderful. Really wonderful. It's so great to chat with you. And yeah, thanks for spending the time. It's been really, really fascinating talking to you.
Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, been really lovely. Really fun. By the way, you don't look anywhere near 56, Giles.
Yeah, a second.
Thank you so much.
I have to say that.
Thank you so much.